everyone, I'm Jennifer Gigas with Quilters Select, and today I want to share with you some information and some hints, tips, and tricks on how to create Dresden plate blocks. The Dresden plate block is created by way of a combination of piecing and applique process. We're going to take a look at how to cut, how to create the Dresden blades, and then how to applique them to our background fabric. So today we'll be having a look at the 30-degree dynamic Dresden ruler. I love this ruler. It has all of the markings that I need in order to correctly or precisely cut the Dresden blade fans in the size that I would like. It also has some markings so that as I start stitching my blades together, I can spot check myself to make sure that I'm maintaining accuracy. And it also has a marking down through the center of the ruler so that if I'm fussy cutting fabrics or cutting from joined fabrics, I have a reference line so that again, I can spot check and make sure that I'm being very accurate. Now, when you're putting together something like a Dresden plate block, you have some variety in terms of what size your blades will be, how much distance do you want in the center of the blades themselves, or do you want to cover them up? Today we're going to have a look at how to create the double pointed blade, and we're going to talk about the impact that the length of the blade strips has, or fabric strips has, on how much room or how large the center of your Dresden ends up being. So we're going to start by determining what size blade we want. In this particular exercise, I believe they were 6-inch strips of fabric that I cut. Now when you cut your 6-inch fabric width, or whatever size you want for the length of your blade, that's your first decision. The second decision that you're going to want to make is how much of a circle do you want in the center of that Dresden plate block. The further up the ruler you go or you cut, the larger the diameter of that circle in the center of your block will be. So you may want to just experiment and play. The closer you are to the skinny end of the ruler, the smaller that diameter will be in the center of the block. The further away you go, the larger it becomes, and the smaller this portion of the block becomes. So a lot of it is about experimenting and trial and error. So I've already cut some strip sets here to show you how to do this. Now personally, with a Dresden or something that's a little more intricate, I like to cut no more than about 2 layers of fabric at a time. I don't want things to shift. I want it to be very accurate and very precise. Now the Quilter Select Dynamic Dresden Ruler was designed in conjunction with Susan Cleveland of Pieces Be With You. And these rulers can be used to create all of the projects that are found in the Dynamic Dresden's Ruler book. So you want to have a look at this, or look for this at any retailer where the Dresden Quilter Select rulers can be found. So we're going to create something. I want a medium size circle in the center of my Dresden ruler. So I'm going to use the 2.5-inch line on my Dresden ruler and place that on the bottom edge of my strip, and it happens to fall on the 7.5-inch line on the top of my ruler. I love that non-slip coating. This is not going to go anywhere as I am cutting my fabrics, and I do like to use my ruler handle so that if I have to fine-tune position the ruler on the fabric, I'm not going to wiggle it around or shift the layers of fabric. So I'm going to cut my first angle. See how nicely the ruler is holding that fabric in place, so I can turn it right around to make the second cut. So I've now cut my first group of blades. I'll then rotate the ruler, reposition it on the fabric. Oh, double check. I said I was cutting at the, where did I say I was cutting? At the 2.5-inch line. So I want to make sure that I have the 2.5-inch marking on the edge of my fabric, the 7.5 on the other end, and cut. Rotate the ruler. I'm aligning the 2.5-inch line and the 7.5-inch at the other end, and cut. And I would continue in this manner until I had enough blades to complete the Dresden. Now, in order to create the shape, the finished shape, I would then take my wedges, you'll fold them right sides together, and then we'll stitch 1/4 inch of the way at the open end on this side of the blade and on this side of the blade. And that's what forms the double points that we see here, or the finished double points that we see. Now, a tip, when you go to the sewing machine to stitch, it is imperative that this is 1/4 inch on each side. I always will stitch from the open edge of the fabric into the fold. And the reason for that is that you start to shift. As you start to stitch, if the fabric begins to shift, it's going to shift into the fold rather than shifting and offsetting your fabric at this end. So always stitch from the open edge to the fold. So we'll go through and we'll stitch this side, and then we'll stitch at this end, again 1/4 inch away, so that you end up with a unit that looks like so. It's been stitched, it's been stitched. Okay, so you have this wonderful little unit. Now the next step is to turn the hats right side out. I do like my R&K point turner for that, and I will just give it a little push and then use the point turner to ease out the end. The end of the point turner has a little rounded tip, so you don't need to worry that you're going to be pushing it through the seam or poking it through the end. So I'll push through that end, and then at the other end, we're going to push the little hat out, use our point turner, and we would at this point take it to the iron and press. Now, if you are newer to stitching Dresden units and it makes you a little uncomfortable to kind of eye this, we are shooting for this seam and this seam to line up down through the center. Before you press these little hats in place, you can take your Quilter Select self-erase marking pen and a ruler and just spot check that your seams are in line, and maybe give yourself just a couple of little dotted markings so that when I go to the iron, I can press and align those center marks that we made with the seam, then press, press, and same thing at this end. Align the seam with those dotted lines that we made and give it a press. That will help to increase your accuracy as you're stitching. If you are working on one of the Dresden plate projects from the Dynamic Dresdens book, Susan has included some templates in here to help ensure that your Dresden plates stay in a nice circular formation. So once you have created your finished units, here we have just a few of them ready to go. They've been pressed, they've been prepped. Our next step is to lay them side by side, flip them right sides together, and your folds should align, your folds should align, and we're going to stitch. It doesn't really make a difference in this case. Top to bottom is the direction that I would normally sew, and so I would sew from here down to the other end, so that when we flip these right side out, it starts to become that circular pattern. I like to stitch mine 2 at a time and then join 2 together, so I have 4, and so on. And I'll do half the circle and then the other half of the circle. I find for me that that's a way to make sure that my Dresden plate or my fan stays in that nice circular shape. Now once I have stitched all of the blades together, I'll take that unit and lay it down on my background fabric. A couple of tips for you. When it comes time to applique the ring to the background fabric, once I have my ring created and I place it down in position on the background, you can pin it in place, but I find that by using pins, there can be a little bit of shift or wiggle that takes place. I like to use a little Stitch Perfection tape. Stitch Perfection tape is a water-soluble, double-sided sticky adhesive. So I would take this and position it in about 4 places, right? So imagine, if you will, your 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. And I'll just put a little of that tape in place and press the Dresden fan down on the base fabric, and this will help hold it in position so that it doesn't wiggle. Then the second tip is to take your Quilter Select fabric glue stick, and then underneath each of the points on the fan, I'll just put a little dab of that glue in place and press those points down. Now, if you've not worked with the Quilter Select glue stick before, I love this. It's yellow. We can see it when we place it, when we put it on our fabric. It dries clear, and it really dries quickly and will hold that fabric in place. So now, between the little dots of our Quilter Select glue stick and our Stitch Perfection tape, this is not going to go anywhere in the applique process. You could use a straight stitch and stitch just inside the fold, or if your machine has a blanket stitch, that's my applique stitch of choice for my Dresden fans, and I will just let the straight part of that blanket stitch ride right along the edge of the fan, and that little bite of the blanket stitch comes right inside. Now, in order to make that as invisible as possible, you'll want to be sure to use the right thread. If I want the thread really to blend in, I like to work with either the Quilter Select 80 weight thread. It's a very fine, strong thread, and it is practically invisible in these little stitches as you work your way around. If I'd like for it to have a little more something happening, if I want a little more definition, maybe to look like it's been done by hand, then I might go to something like our Flawless threads. The Flawless threads have a matte finish. They are a 40 weight thread, and they really will have a little more impact in the stitching than an 80 or a 60 weight thread would. Once you have gone all the way around and your applique work is done on the inside and on the outside, your block is complete. Now, this is just one method of creating Dresden plates. There are so many other variations out there. We cannot wait to see what you create with your Dresden rulers.